Let's bring in the Shadow Health Minister Anne Ruston, who joins me from Canberra. Thanks for joining us, Anne. Will the abolition of this card lead to families being destroyed and lives being lost?
Well, Chris, if the government actually had abolished the cashless debit card last night, as it's claiming to have done, then I think we are likely to see, significant social harm increases in the communities. But the reality is, last night, the Labor Party didn't abolish the cashless debit card. What they're trying to do is to con Australians into believing that. What they did was they actually extended the use of the cashless debit card. They're just going to call it by another name. So I think, we need for the government to actually come clean and be honest with the Australian public. They professed that they were going to end income management in Australia. That is not what they are doing. They're extending income management in the Northern Territory. So Minister Burney can say all she likes about how ideologically they're getting rid of a particular form of support for people on income management. They are not. They are not getting rid of income management. They are merely changing the name of the cashless debit card to something else and keeping income management in its existing form throughout Australia.
Well, if that's the case, why did you vote against this? And isn't this a good thing then?
We voted to support the amendments that the government were forced into bringing into the chamber last night. That meant that income management in the form of the cashless debit card would remain in place in the Northern Territory. It would remain in place in Cape York as requested by the Cape York community. Sadly, whilst they're leaving the cashless debit card in place in the 4 trial sites that you mentioned in your introduction, they're going to make it voluntary. We believe that if the government has got long-term intentions about income management, they should come clean with what those intentions are before they create this uncertainty. I mean, the amount of uncertainty, confusion and distress that this ridiculously ill-conceived policy and legislation from last night has caused in communities. And as I said, they've really done little more than made it voluntary in 4 sites around Australia and left every single other piece of income management, including the cashless debit card, in place everywhere else. And they're saying they're going to change to a new and advanced card. It's just the cashless debit card. They're going to call it by another name.
Tell us about the aspect of this being voluntary, because sometimes that can work well because people know they need a bit of help with managing their money, so they volunteer for a system like this. But is a compulsory system critical in some situations?
Well, I think that's why you need to listen to the voices of Indigenous Australians, and there was no more compelling evidence than that was given by Noel Pearson at the inquiry, when he said that the cashless debit card and the compulsory implementation of the cashless debit card in Cape York had turned the lives around of the people of his community. And so you've got to listen to the voices of those sorts of people, not listen to voices of inner city people who've probably never even visited a site that has these particular mechanisms in place. Every single site in Australia that has the cashless debit card have requested it. And if you, in certain circumstances, if you allow it to be voluntary, the very people who probably need it most are the ones that are likely to come off it. And in doing so, there is often great harm done to those other people in the community. So when somebody who has got an addiction comes off the card, their behaviour towards other people in the community and their family members can sometimes be quite unpleasant. And so making it compulsory means that the people who need the support the most are the ones that are actually receiving that support.
Well, even though you believe there's some smoke and mirrors in what's gone on here, presumably you'll be watching very carefully what happens on the ground, and you don't want to see any sort of pulling back from the schemes that are in place already?
No, what we'll do is we'll watch very closely. The government has said that they're going to bring in new legislation between now and the 6th of March 2023, and we'll be watching very closely to see what that is. But I think, this just highlights the obsession with this government of ticking and flicking election commitments with no regard whatsoever that their completely ill-conceived and badly prepared legislation, the implications that it's going to have on the people it's supposed to be supporting. And one other thing last night, Chris, that just shows the absolute height of hypocrisy of this government is the opposition moved an amendment to explicitly prevent aged pensioners being able to be forced onto the cashless debit card. The government voted against it. I mean, it beggars belief, Chris, that these guys will do and say anything for a vote and to tick and flick an election commitment. they don't really care about what the consequences are.
That was an attempt to tick off a pre-election scare campaign by the sounds of it. But as you say, all behind us now. Thanks for joining us, Anne Ruston.
My pleasure.
Senator Anne Ruston there, who's the Shadow Health Minister and represents South Australia.